Mike Wilson here, the host of the Stutter with Confidence podcast, and I'm happy today to be joined by Geoff Johnston from Down Under. Geoff, for those that don't know you, if you would let people know where exactly you live in Australia and what you do, and maybe what, just to get that out of the way, what's going on with your forehead there.
Thanks a lot, Michael. Really happy to be here. Yeah, I had a skin cancer removed yesterday afternoon, so it's still looking a little bit nasty. Interesting observation, though. I was having it done. I had a sheet over my head, no eye contact, and I was carrying on a conversation with the guy who was doing the procedure perfectly fluently. And I thought to myself, how would my speech been in this situation 20 years ago? And I would have been a stuttering mess. So it's nice to be reminded of things like that on an everyday basis. But about me, I live in a little town called Strathalbyn, which is about an hour's drive southeast of Adelaide, which is the capital of South Australia. I'm retired now, but I had a long career in information technology, and I also had 14 years running a program here in Australia for people who stutter. I'm 75, and I've reached the age where my speech is I really don't care anymore. And I must say that's been really empowering. So that's who I am. I have an interest in stuttering. I have a passion to help people who stutter, been on radio, television, written quite a few papers. So that passion has never left me, trying to help people who stutter. So I'm very happy to be here and join in a conversation on stuttering.
Sounds good. And so Geoff, are you like, I hate to put a percentage, but 99 point something percent of us who stutter, that you've got some pretty challenging memories from childhood surrounding your stutter? And if so, you want to share maybe the toughest memory or two that you have from childhood that sticks in your mind?
Interesting, Marco. I sat down last year and I started to write my biography, the story of my life. And I was going to approach it in 0 to 10, 10 to 20, in 10-year slots. Started to write the 0 to 10. Wrote about 10 pages and I thought, this is bloody depressing, because I had a hell of a time at school. I think most of us did. We were bullied. The teachers had no understanding at all about stuttering and how to maybe help a kid who stuttered. So that was quite a depressing time at school. I was caned quite often for fighting. Kids would tease me, so I would thump them and I'd be called up to the headmaster. And interesting though, I would never try to explain what was happening. I would rather accept being caned than risk speaking and stuttering. When I look back on that, that's really, really sad, I thought. But later on in high school, I found I could play AFL, Australian Rules Football, and I attained the high standard in that and captained the footy team and captained the tennis team. So that gave me a degree of self-belief, self-esteem, self-confidence. And I believe there's a direct relationship between self-confidence and fluency. I struggled, I still stuttered, but the kids no longer bullied me because there was a bit of respect there for me. Turned out to be a house captain and a prefect in the high school that I attended. So those experiences really gave me a bit of confidence. And that's what I advise parents who come to me asking questions about their children who have begun to stutter. Just get them involved in an activity they're really good at, whether it be music or sport, whatever, to try and build up their confidence and self-esteem, and that will help a lot.
That's interesting that you say that. And yes, I mean, you know, this is probably true of any condition that makes a child feel very different from the others, and, you know, is tempted to feel inadequate and inferior to the other kids, you know, to get good at something, right? To really be, you know, and there's also a certain amount of self-expression there. I mean, I experienced this, you know, so people listen to my podcast have heard me tell this story my senior year of high school, when neither of my only two friends in the school, people I was comfortable talking to, risking stuttering in front of, when neither of them were in my lunch period, rather than find another table, I chose to spend the whole lunch hour, my entire senior year of high school, hiding in the bathroom stall, you know, literally smelling other boys' stuff as they came in and used the stall next to me. So that's about as degrading as it gets. But at that same time, my senior year of high school, I was finally coming into my own as a basketball player. And so, you know, and basketball is a pretty public sort of sport, right? The fans are like right on top of you. It's not like American football where you got a helmet and you're, you know, a long way away from people. So I was coming into my own, and we were good. We were winning. The people were fired up on our team, and I was playing well, but I had this deep, dark secret that I was hiding in the bathroom for lunch every day. And it was interesting on the court. In the heat of the moment, I could talk just fine. I could say what I wanted. I was like a leader style, but then I step off the court when it's not, you know, adrenaline flowing and sort of a no holding back, just, you know, passion just pouring out of you sort of a thing. Suddenly I couldn't get, you know, two words out to save my life. And so that was a very interesting time in my life, when on the one hand, I was flying high and feeling great, and on the other hand, just deeply ashamed, you know. But the confidence was being built at that time, I think largely from the sports and you know, from the, you know, obviously your family also gives you some of that as a child, for sure. That was very important. But that experience of knowing that I could be good at something and that I could handle pressure, for example, I could step out in front of, you know, whatever, 500 people playing against a team that was better than us, and you know, play above my ability sort of thing with confidence. That was important.
I certainly had no problem swearing at the umpire when I was playing footy. But you used a very interesting term. You were able to let go. And I talk a lot about free expression, because I think stuttering is really the act of holding back with our emotions, with our speech. And to be able to let go and stop holding back, expressing yourself on the basketball court, that was such a healthy environment, and you could speak really well because you weren't thinking about not stuttering, trying to be fluent. You're out there just playing basketball, having fun with your mates. And so it was an exercise in letting go and being who you are, Michael Wilson. Yeah.
Absolutely. And well, that reminds me of the conversation with John Harrison, which I believe you listened to. And would you say that that central aspect of the way that John Harrison thinks about stuttering, and he's got an exercise where he encourages people to grab, you know, any book on stuttering and take a few pages of it, and everywhere where you see the word stuttering or stutter, cross it out and write holding back.
That's right.
And for me, first time I heard that idea, which was only about 3.5 years ago, I had always been deeply confused by what the hell was going on. Why, when you took away the people, or when well, yeah, take away the people, you're speaking with the dog or you're talking to yourself in the mirror, suddenly I didn't have a problem. But in most situations, I had a big problem. And that never made any sense to me. It was like, wait a second, I know my speech machinery works, right? And I think most people that stutter, there was actually just research that came out by Eric Jackson and Scott Yaris and a couple others, where from what I understand, this might have been the first time in history that this was confirmed from a scientific research standpoint, that people that stutter, at least the 25 or whatever it was number of people they had in that study, they set up the circumstances where those folks thought that they were alone, like they genuinely believed they were alone in some situations. And lo and behold, even people with severe stutters were all of a sudden not stuttering. And now we all, you talk to people that stutter, and we all know that's how it is for most of us, but it was good to finally, see that confirmed. And I'm not, I don't know all the research that's been done, so maybe it has been done in the past, but it was recently done. And so when I heard that perspective, which I think Joseph Sheehan talked a good bit about holding back also, and John Harrison, believes that strongly. And as soon as I heard that, I was like, wait a second. What's happening in those moments is I'm holding it back. Not it's some mysterious, I don't know, force from another universe that shows up that nobody has any idea what's going on, or even, the deep recesses of my brain. It's just so complicated. And I'm not saying it's simple in our brain. Nothing about the human brain is simple, but, is it holding back? And things like that John Harrison's also big on with, which I believe, Geoff, that you're a believer in as well, things like projecting your voice, right? Raising your volume some, which is totally the opposite of holding back and low talking, right? Just go for it, very much like in sports, right? Let's say you're, playing rugby, as we call it over here, or, Australian rules football, or you're playing basketball or soccer or football, as you guys call it over there. When you're making a move, if you go passively, right, it's not going to work out. You got to make up your mind and go, right? Just go for it assertively. That's the way to play a sport. I think there's a lot of correlation there with speaking.
Yeah. I suppose that brings up the question, what causes stuttering? And I think it's been proven now, and it took me a while to believe this, that there's a physiological cause, an organic cause to stuttering. And people may be born with a predisposition to stutter. But then if that's the case, why don't we stutter all the time? So there's obviously another factor there. And I know myself, my grandchildren, as they grew up, I would be perfectly fluent with them up to about the age of 5 or 6. But once they reached that age and had the capacity in my mind to judge me, I started to have problems with them. So I think, although there's a predisposition to stutter, which might be a physiological thing, I think the triggers that actually make the stuttering occur are almost entirely psychological. And look, a fluent speaker, any normally fluent speaker, put under enough pressure about a topic they don't know well, they'll have disfluencies and they'll and they might even stutter on words, but their stuttering is not chronic, where ours, well, certainly mine was. So it's very interesting to think about that. And the speech pathologists, they tended to focus, well, in the past, in my experience, tended to focus on the physical side of stuttering, the top 10% of the iceberg, trying to gets you to speak like I did. So many courses of smooth speech. So we were taught soft contacts and gentle onsets and that kind of thing. And that works as long as there's no pressure. It works very well in the clinic. And one-to-one with the speech pathologists, they measure stuttered syllables per minute, which I think is a complete farce. They need to be measuring that out in the real world.
Right. That's what I was going to say. I mean, measuring it in the clinic when you're talking to the friendly therapist who your whole relationship with her, usually her revolves around your speech, and she's so supportive and so nice, and just from remembering your technique, she's with you, so it's easy to remember it. And I had that experience in every speech therapy I had ever done, where it would work pretty good, and I was trained on that. We don't call it smooth speech over here, we call it easy onset, and some call it amplitude contour. I don't know if those are identical, but it's like this, where you barely articulate your sounds. And it might, I mean, like you said, it doesn't hold up when you leave the clinic. But from my perspective, even if it did, I don't want to sound like this. Who is talking right now? Is it Mike Wilson? It doesn't sound like Mike Wilson, you know?
Sounds like a robot. Mind you, having said that about measurement, I do understand that they need to measure to justify their treatment and maybe put in an application for a government grant for further research. I understand they have to measure, but I think they're measuring the wrong thing. And the only real measurement is to hitch a ride in someone's hip pocket in everyday life, in their working environment and answering the phone and things like that. And of course, that's not always possible, but there's technology now. I used to support people who had an important speech to make. They'd have an earbud in and I'd be connected via my mobile phone, giving them instant feedback. And it's interesting, I only had to do that once or twice, and then they flew alone. They went alone because their confidence had been built up, so they didn't need that support. Any treatment for stuttering, there has to be a strategy and small steps, 3 steps forward, 2 steps backwards. But if you keep your eye on the end prize, improvement is certainly achievable. I know, particularly in the States, there's the stutter pride thing. You should be able to stutter and everyone around you should accept that. Well, the bad news is the world's not going to change that quickly. So you can do something about it. I know hundreds of people worldwide who have changed their life really by improving their speech. It's not about fluency. It's about effective communication. And I know the type of stuttering, little repetitions like that, well, people can handle that. They think, oh, this guy's got a stutter, but that's all right. I've seen the movie, The King's Speech, no big deal. But it's the blocks, the 10, 15-second blocks that really upset people. They don't know what to do. They don't know what's happening. So it's really important, no matter what treatment people are using, to perfect the automatic block release. So you don't push through the block, you cancel the block and go back and nice deep breath and say the word again. So I reckon people who stutter, if you can eliminate the block from your habit of stuttering, I'm not sure that the rest of it matters to any great extent. But one thing about stutter pride is the assertive self-acceptance. And I think that's great. Stop hiding it. Put it out there for display. That'll reduce the fear of stuttering, the fear of judgment, and improvement in effective communication will follow. In the end, though, Michael, the only measure that counts is quality of life. And it's got nothing to do with fluency. It's about wanting to say what you want to say to whomever when you want to say it. And it could be a little bit disfluent, but as John Harrison says, live by your intentions, not your expectations. So if you go into a sandwich bar to buy lunch, and you might stutter a bit, but if you walk out with what you wanted for lunch, hey, that's a great achievement. You've honored your intentions. Sure, you may not have been perfectly fluent, but hey, big deal. You got what you want for lunch.
That's good stuff. And yes, I mean, right? What's the point of talking? It's to communicate, right? It's to get what we want to get from my head into the listener's head, or from your head into my head, right? That's the point. It's not, nobody's handing out, fluency awards. I mean, that's not, I've never heard of anybody getting a fluency award, right? And 99% of people don't stutter. So by definition, anything that 99% of people can do is not special. It's not, it's not like amazing. And I absolutely agree with you. Quality of life is what matters most. And so I now run a coach, a new coaching program through Zoom. And my whole phase one is all about facing our full-on stutter. So no attempt to control it whatsoever in phase one. It's all about going out and learning to look people in the eye and to have, well, whatever your natural stutter is, but mine was talking look like this, where I would have to push my way through words, but I was gonna finish my sentence and I was gonna look you in the eye. So you as the listener knew what you were supposed to do. You were supposed to sit there and listen because Wilson was going to finish his sentence. And, I didn't have to say that to people, but just with eye contact, people knew this guy's pretty determined to tell me what he wants to tell me. I'm going to sit here respectfully and I'm going to listen. And I actually found, and you were talking about stutter pride, and I had a good conversation on the podcast, maybe 10 episodes ago or so, with Chris Constantino, and he talks about something called stutter gain, which takes a page out of the deaf gain playbook, which is very counterintuitive for us folks who stutter. What do you mean I gained something from stuttering, right? Most of us would say, what the heck are you talking about, because there's so much pain in our heart, or at least there was, going back to childhood when we were developing as human beings, right? We hated nothing more in this universe than our stutter. But Chris talks about an example where when you have a good stutter going, I like to call it a good stutter now as opposed to a bad stutter. And, let's say you're at work and you walk past a colleague. The normal interaction there is, hey, Bob. Oh, hey, Sally. How are you? Good. Okay. Have a good one. Right? Just quick small talk. Doesn't mean too much. I mean, it's friendly, it's fine, but it, doesn't mean that much. Now those two people are walking by each other, and this resonated with me because I did this tens of thousands of times where, hey, Mike, hey, how's it going? Hey, Sally, it's good.
Yeah.
How are you? Oh, I'm good, Mike, blah, blah, blah. So now, rather than a quick, hey, how you doing, blah, 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 it's, hey, stop. And actually, yes, it's a disfluent, some struggling human moment, but it's a real human moment, right? And we have to stop. She has to stop. And, not has to, but that's the respectful thing to do, right? And so there's actually, now it can be asked, well, what's gained exactly there, Mike? Well, there's a moment of vulnerability there, right? Mike's showing his stutter. It's a struggle for him to just say hello to Sally. which is not a struggle for 99% of people, but there's a certain, humanity, I guess, in that moment. And something interesting in my life is, I'm a dentist and I own 5 dental practices in upstate New York, which was all built with the good stutter going. Maybe 230 employees, about 30 dentists or so that work in the practices. And so for the first 10 years I had the practices, I had the good stutter going. So every time I interviewed a doctor, it was, hey, Dr. Jones, thanks for calling. So you're interested in possibly working with us in upstate New York, right? Have the conversation, but with my good stutter going. And now for the last 3.5 years, I've been doing those doctor interviews, talking like I'm talking now. So I clearly had a stutter before, a pretty severe one. Now it's, unless I'm really using the voluntary stuttering and really actively trying to show it, it's not, they don't know I stutter. And I swear, Geoff, for those first 10 years, there was an instant trust that was built. After one conversation, the doctors trusted me on a level that you shouldn't trust, like an employer after one conversation that much. You don't know them yet, right? But I swear, and I don't know if it was conscious or subconscious, probably some of both. Man, this guy's got a pretty severe speech impediment going, and yet, he's interviewing me and he's got all these practices, so there was and now I don't get that as much. The conversations are still good, but for all they know, now I'm a guy with no problems whatsoever, no challenges in life. Oh, maybe he inherited these practices from his daddy. They don't know what's going on, and so there can be stutter gain, and there can be, and I didn't have pride in my stutter per se. I never liked my stutter. I never thought it was ideal. It was certainly not I couldn't cover as much ground as I can now. It wasn't that efficient in my opinion, and I like efficiency, but in retrospect, there was some gain. It humanized me in a certain way. And, so I do think there's something to be said for the stutter pride. I don't think it's just, oh, stuttering is beautiful, just believe us because we said so. I think there's something to it, although I will not deny I choose this over having to battle through my words. That wasn't as fun as this, for sure.
I think, Michael, what you've just spoken about is what I would call desensitizing us to other people's reaction. And in the program I used to run, people used to, they were required to go out on the streets and talk to 100 strangers, maintaining appropriate eye contact and using voluntary stuttering, maintaining that eye contact and just observing the other person's reaction. Because in the past, when we stutter, we averted our eyes, we looked away. So this was forcing us to have the experience of observing the other people's reaction to our stuttering. Sometimes it was a smile, sometimes it was a laugh, other times it was confusion. But that was very, very important to go through that. And eye contact, that's the other powerful tool we have. We can maintain appropriate eye contact, that will reduce the stuttering as well. And that's really challenging and interesting that people with autism, they avert their eyes as well. And I've wondered if it was for a similar reason, but I can't say for sure that was the case. I haven't researched that, but appropriate eye contact shows respect, gives you confidence, and it enables you to assess the other person's reaction. So that's a process of desensitization to other people's reaction to our stuttering.
Absolutely. And we historically, most of us, are super sensitive to those reactions from other people, right? I mean, and you're going to get looks, especially at first. People, I mean, not always, some people have are just able to just basically keep the poker face better than others, right? When they see that. But a lot of times people at first, they're just trying to process. They're like, you'll get looks like, what's going on? Or, like a nervous laugh. And that's largely because they're nervous, because they don't know what to do in those situations, or, people might look away. There's a lot of things that they could do. But once they figure out what's going on, oh, this guy's got a stutter. Let me just be patient, sit here and give him the time to speak. Most people will do that. I mean, maybe not 100 years ago or 500 years ago, but in the modern world, people are, pretty tolerant to that kind of difference. But if we are intolerant to our own difference, and we are, and I know this is something that you're big on also, right? That is so important not to hide, not to be trying to hide our stutter. And I had a recent episode with Vivian Siskin, and she had worked under, had trained under, worked with Joseph Sheehan for 10 years before he died suddenly in 1983, I think. But she was with him for a long time, and she mentioned, transmitted from Joseph Sheehan, which is her perspective also, which was the title of the episode, that stuttering is much more, I forget exactly what the words were on the title, but stuttering is much more about our identity than it is about our speech, and I think that John Harrison and yourself would would you agree with that?
Oh, sure. If I recently wrote a paper for the Stuttering Awareness Day, and it was about changing our relationship with the world. And if you want to change your speech, first of all, you have to change you, how you think about things, like get rid of negative thinking, stop mind reading, those kinds of things, and your stance and your body language and eye contact and all that kind of thing. It's not enough just to change your speech pattern. You have to change all the habits that have been supporting the stuttering for all of our lives. And that's hard work. You have to be brave, put in a lot of hard work, and you have to be resilient as well, because changing yourself is really difficult. And it's funny, as human nature, our subconscious, it fights change. It doesn't like change. Even though back here, the stuttering is somehow comfortable because we know it. And to change that and change aspects of our life is really uncomfortable. And growth only happens outside of our comfort zone. So we have to seek out situations where we're fearful and embrace them. The book by Susan Jeffers, Feel the Fear and Do It Anyway, is very, very powerful and a great book. Unfortunately, she's passed away now, but a great book for anyone who stutters to read. You just have to be brave. And I suppose that's where my big improvement has been over the past 10, 20 years of actively sought out opportunities to speak to service clubs, to church groups. I've been president of my local Kiwanis club, and I just go out of my way now to speak to everyone and anyone. I create opportunities to speak. I was speaking on a local community radio a couple months ago, and they want me to have my own radio segment. And I think, crikey, 20 years ago, would never have dreamt of doing something like that. So I'm thinking of doing an hour on Australian country music, interspersed with Australian poetry by Henry Lawson and Banjo Patterson, Australian poets. Fancy imagining me reading poetry on a community radio. I smile because it is quite amusing, I think. But for people who stutter out there, you just have to be brave. And we have a belief that we can't talk eloquently in certain situations. The way to dispel that belief, that perception, is to get out there and have a go. Now, you won't be perfect, but the more you do it, the fear will start to reduce and you'll be more successful. Making these speeches, I had a script and I put a red slash every 5 to 6 words where I was going to pause and breathe again, because really, if you've got no breath, there's no speech. So breathing is really critical. So I would start by rehearsing that 10, 20 times. On the day, I would do it perfectly. And I kept doing things like that. And now I've thrown the script away. I don't need it. So small steps. And they have to be successful steps. So don't go in there flying by the seat of your pants thinking, oh, it might work this morning. You have to have a strategy to make sure it does work. And that's how you build up your self-confidence and approaching those situations with confidence now. And yeah, once a term, I go into a local primary school, I present certificates to the high achievers in the primary school, have to make a speech in front of a couple of hundred people. First time I did that, I was scared. I was a bit fearful because I'm not fluent. I still stutter under certain circumstances. But when it happens, it still surprises me. But with me, it's the old habit of stuttering. Go into a situation and an old video plays and a smell or a touch, or I see something and flash back to previous experiences. And so there's still the old residual habit of stuttering there. But the more I get up and speak, the more challenges I embrace, the more confident I become.
Well, and Geoff, out of curiosity, in those moments when they happen now, and I like to call it our opponent in this game or sport, if you will. I like to name the opponent, so I like to call it the stuttering wolf. When the stuttering wolf shows up in those moments, is it still accompanied with, like, is there a surge of the old thoughts like, oh, what are people going to think if I totally lose control here and start stuttering my head off?
Yeah, the fear is still there in those situations, but I now have a strategy I know that works. I resist time pressure. I stand there and I pause. And then for the next 2 or 3 paragraphs, I drop down to a maximum of 5 words per breath with a good 2-second pause, making sure all my residual air is expired, and a nice full breath to build up pressure behind my vocal cords. I only have to do that for a couple of paragraphs and I'm right back there again. So that's a strategy that works for me. Don't have to do it all that often these days, but I know it's there for me. And I don't consciously use any technique these days. And I feel for people who are still relying on a technique 10, 12 years after they've learned it, because that means the fear of stuttering is still there to a certain extent. If you have a crooked knee and you're having to use a walking stick to get around, you won't know if your knee is okay and you can walk normally unless you park the walking stick in the closet. and try to walk without it. It's the same with technique, whatever technique you're using, and there's so many around, which is, I think, evidence that there's little understanding of stuttering and how to, well, I don't use the word cure, but how to improve it, if you like. But so there's so much on the internet. I'm hoping that the profession will keep doing their research and maybe in future, young children, particularly young boys, won't have to go through the pain that we've had to go through, Michael.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, the pain of some of those childhood experiences run so deep. And as you know, Geoff, working with adults that stutter, you're battling their childhood demons to a large extent, right? That deep fear and hatred of stuttering and feelings of inferiority and just, what are people gonna think? All that stuff that got in our head as a kid is hard to extract later. It's, the progress can be made. There's now a lot of evidence just in science in general that we can, there's evidence you can have people even in their 80s, you can teach an old dog new tricks. We can rewire our neurology to some extent, but it would be great if we didn't have that iceberg, that deep and dark iceberg forming in the first place. And, that reminds me of another episode with Dr. Courtney Bird at the University of Texas at Austin. And she's very interesting, Geoff. I'm not sure if you're aware of her, but her whole thing is, which is pretty at odds with Lidcombe, which is from Australia, right? And is the dominant, from what I understand, the dominant way of working with small children who stutter. But Courtney Bird's perspective on this, and she's on fire with passion, which is awesome. Even though she's not a person that stutters, it's, normally the most, in my experience, generally, it's not always true, but people that are most passionate about stuttering usually are people that stutter themselves, but there are exceptions, and certainly Courtney is one of those exceptions. And her whole thing, well, this is best explained by a story that she tells of a little girl that they worked with in their clinic. She's 6 years old, has a decent stutter going. She was at the dentist. So this is after, she had worked with them. She's at the dentist. The dentist walks in and asks her name. And she stuttered on her name. And the dentist said, "What, did you forget your name, sweetheart?" Now, we've all heard that as people that stutter. At one point in time, at least, it would make our blood boil to hear that from people. And many of us still, which is understandable. But this little 6-year-old girl's response to the dentist, because she's trained up on this, she knows she has a stutter and she knows what to say in those situations. So she said, "Oh no, Doctor, whatever his name was, I just have a stutter. And sometimes it takes me a little bit longer to get words out, but if you just wait, the words will come out." Now, who felt like they were this big after that interaction, right? It was the dentist, I'm sure. So rather than her just stumbling into that situation when she's 6 or 8, or, I was about 10 when I really internalized the fact that I stuttered and started trying hard not to stutter and started feeling shame. This little girl knows exactly how to deal with people that might be confused about her stutter, right? I would bet she's probably not going to develop that deep and dark iceberg near as much as most of us. And that, to me, and Courtney's point is, and she said this on the podcast, from her reading of the research, there's no evidence whatsoever that a higher percentage of 4-year-olds, let's say 4 or 5, little kids, are actually outgrowing their stutter, whether they had stuttering therapy to fix their stutter when they were 4 or not, right? 4 out of 5 kids will outgrow it anyway with no therapy whatsoever. And her reading of the research is there's no evidence that it goes up to 88% or that the percentage increases based on that therapy to fix their stutter. So why don't we just guarantee or do everything we can to make sure they don't develop the shame and the embarrassment and the feelings of inferiority in the first place. And then if they outgrow it, great, fine. But, so we're not shattering lives, basically, right? Which is what happens, that below the iceberg stuff. You have thoughts on that? I can see your wheels are turning there.
Yeah. No, there's an opinion here in Australia that there is no evidence that the Lightman program has a higher success rate than kids naturally outgrowing their stuttering, which backs up what you've just said. But look, anything that's worth having, you have to work hard for. And I'm 75 now, and I look back on my life, and would I change it? Would I wish to be fluent without a stutter? And I've decided no. I've decided that my stuttering, which was really overt, I used to stutter on every syllable of every word. I didn't attempt to say words more than 2 syllables. It has made me very patient. I hope I'm empathetic with people. And my stuttering has made me who I am. And I'm reasonably happy at my age with who I am. So there's no easy way of doing it, but it takes a lot of hard work. Bit of a funny story. I was running a course in Galway in Ireland, and just south of Galway is a castle called Blimey Castle. And not sure if you heard of the Blimey stone, but if you go up to this castle and you kiss the Blimey stone, it gives you the gift of eloquence. And I did this before the course. So I rock up at the course in Galway and I said, you realize you're all wasting your time here. You just need an hour's drive south, kiss the Blimey stone and you're cured. So that was a bit of a funny story, because I hadn't realized before I went to this Blimey Castle that the result of kissing the stone was the gift of eloquence, but kind of tied in nicely with the course I was running. So
that's good stuff. Yeah. And from what I understand from science in general, the placebo effect is real. It's there. If we believe something's helping, and not that it's going to cure cancer or cure our stuttering forever or anything like that, but it is real. And certainly, stuttering, I mean, we've all had the placebo effect for a while with some new trick, right? Oh, when I slap my leg, the word comes out. Now that only works for, maybe one conversation or a few days or a couple of weeks. It eventually falls apart. But
that goes to changing our name. I had a young man here in Adelaide. He couldn't say his last name, so he changed his last name by default. Guess what word he had difficulties with after a month or two? His new name. So it's very, very interesting how it all works. But for people who stutter out there, just need to assertive self-acceptance. Stuttering doesn't define who you are. It's only one of your behaviors, but we build it up into this massive thing, who we are. We might have to make a speech and we're 98% fluent. We might have stuttered on 2 or 3 words. Driving home, what do we focus on? It's not the great speech we've made. It's this 2 or 3 words we struggled on. And we tend to be perfectionist. And part of what I used to tell my students was to practice being imperfect. I had one guy, he was such a perfectionist. I asked him to wear a different color sock each day to the course. And he really struggled with that. And I was trying to get him to practice being imperfect and to accept that he can't be perfect all the time. And, I think in the end it helped him a bit because he didn't expect perfect speech every time he spoke. So that kind of released him from this expectation, and he was able to live by his intentions more by doing that, I think.
And one of my favorite quotes of all time, which applies to many aspects of life, but in this one, I think it's really good. Perfect is the enemy of the good.
Yes.
Right. And I definitely had that perfectionist thing when I was a kid, in particular around people's speech. I remember thinking to myself, man, if I didn't have the stutter, I'd be so much better a talker than all these people in this classroom, which was a perfectionist thing. I was judging myself harshly. I was judging other people harshly. And that's something I had to learn over time. Like, don't, just take people for what they are and try to understand what they're saying and who they are. And if you like them and want to spend more time with them, do so. If not, no worries, spend time with somebody else. But
it's I think it's a case we have to realize no matter what age we are, we have a life to live. And I know so many people, they work so hard at trying to eliminate their stuttering. It's the old 80-20 rule. We can spend 80% of our time trying to get the last 20% right. I think there comes a time where if you stutter occasionally, not blocks, but just repetitions like that, well, hey, if you don't have the fear of stuttering, the fear of judgment, I don't think that's a particularly bad thing because we have a life to live. And so we stutter from time to time. Big deal. No one cares. We care too much about it. So my suggestion was be kind to ourselves and realize we're not perfect. And occasionally we might have a few problems with our speech. But hey, that's who we are. It's only one part, it's only one part of who we are, I meant to say. It doesn't identify us. And like Michael Wilson, I'm sure you have many other wonderful attributes. A father, 4 kids, all that kind of stuff. You're a high achiever. So you've got a lot to be proud of. And the fact that you might have a stutter from time to time, well, I don't know, I think it's a particularly minor thing.
Well, and you mentioned earlier that if you could change it, now looking back, that you would not. And that's how I feel also. Like I wouldn't want to live another life where I was born without the stutter, because then I wouldn't be me. And if anything, I mean, as a friend of mine said, in the 21st century, to be totally normal is so boring. You got to have a thing, right? And we have a thing. And so, why not embrace the journey? And like you said, with the empathy, with the compassion, I mean, there are aspects of our character, important aspects of our character, which probably would not be as developed if we hadn't had this thing that made life super difficult for us. So it's easier for us to, understand when life is super difficult for somebody else rather than just sort of never, experiencing anything like that.
Mind you, Michael, if I have an opportunity to help parents to ensure that their 4, 5, 6-year-old won't grow up to be a chronic stutterer, I'll certainly do my best. And it's very close to home because after having 5 granddaughters, I've at last got a little grandson. He's now 4, and his father is a person who stutters. My daughter's partner, and I stutter. So his name's Finn. He has stuttering on both sides of the family. and just a little bit anxious about him. He's delayed in pronouncing his words, so he has delayed speech production. So I'm keeping a close eye on him without drawing undue attention to him. But if I can be instrumental in making sure he doesn't grow up to be a chronic stutterer, I'll be doing everything I can to make sure that happens.
Yep. I know what you're saying, and I've got 4 kids, and none of them so far have shown any signs of stuttering. They're between the ages of 5 and 11. And if they were, and we want that because we wouldn't wish this on, any child, because we know the challenges that it can bring. But the program that you had led was the Mcguire program in Australia, right?
That's correct.
Yeah.
I did that for 13, 14 years, over 1,200 students, I think, during that time.
And what was the youngest children that you guys would work with?
We took children 12 years and over. Fairly complicated. It's hard work. It's very disciplined. A child under the age of 12 wouldn't have the self-discipline, in our opinion, and the ability to do the ownership. That's the first thing, ownership. Stop being a victim, waiting for someone to cure you. You have to own it, and assertive self-acceptance. Under 12-year-old, I don't think would be capable of doing that. And really, the number of treatments people who stutter have that have failed, to use that term, that starts to eat away at their hope, their belief that anything can ever help them. And I guess the Mcguire program in 1999 was my last ditch effort. And it had a very strong sports mentality. And I was playing a lot of sports, so that really appealed to me. But no matter what program, and there's so many around, the key is ongoing coaching and support. Many of these programs have similar treatment modalities, if you like, but the ongoing coaching and support is where it's all at. And thankfully, that program has really strong ongoing coaching and support. So if someone out there is trying to choose a program to help them, the first question is, what ongoing coaching and support will I receive? Now, professional speech pathologists, they can provide that, but at a cost. Ring up for support. The first thing they'll do probably is ask for the number of your credit card. And I don't judge them for that. That's their job. That's how they earn their income. But if you can find that ongoing coaching and support that is freely available, normally by recovered stutterers, they have that passion to help you. They understand what you're going through, and really, really valuable, that ongoing coaching and support.
Yeah, the way I look at it, and this is something that we do on my Stutter with Confidence coaching program as well. Like I describe it as happening in 3 phases. Phase 1 is what I was describing earlier, where there's no technique. We just go out and face those fears and learn to look people in the eye. And that's what was done for me when I was 18 years old. And it really changed my world, even though I still stuttered a lot. For the next 23 years, I was going to say what I wanted. I was going to look people in the eye. So that's our phase 1. Phase 2 is, learning some techniques. But phase 3 is the rest of our life, as I like to describe it, because nobody's cured here. There is no cure. And why don't we use each other? Let's call each other regularly. Let's practice. Let's support each other. Let's encourage each other. Let's coach each other. Let's peer mentor each other. And like you said, so if nobody's cured, then we're not wasting each other's time. Nobody has to pay anybody for it because you need the practice and I need the practice, right? So let's call each other and do it. That's very sustainable relative to a model where, and like you said, I totally get why the speech therapist can't be on call for all of her clients, his or her clients all the time. Hey, I need a warm up. We got a speech today. I need a warm up at 7 a.m. Well, the therapist can't be doing that for everybody that they work with. It's not practical,
Exactly.
right?
Exactly.
But when everybody, in the group stutters, or at least you got practice partners, ideally that are trained in the same way as you. So we're not one person's using this, one's using that, one's using this. And we're all sort of, well, what should I do? I don't know. I do this. Well, it's probably good, just like a sports team, not to have 10 different philosophies on the team, right? Have a philosophy, get everybody rowing in the same direction, and then practice, use each other to practice and for support. That's powerful.
That's
And I
wonderful.
think, yeah, well, and I think, Geoff, that this is probably, this is going to become much more, my hope is that this is going to become much more common in the future of help for folks who stutter, where we utilize the human resources, which is each other largely, right, for practicing and support.
Yeah. I have this belief, I think, Michael, that the solution for stuttering will come from people who stutter. It'll come bottom up rather than top down because of the passion we have to help other people who stutter. We know such a lot about it, and it's been really disappointing for me that the professional speech pathologists don't interact with people who stutter more and more. Don't go to them and ask for their opinion. What worked for you? What didn't work for you? I have a paper here. What works? What doesn't work? And there's about 20 points under each of those headings. I've offered that to speech pathologists. They're not interested. They've got the diploma on the wall. They're the experts. And in my opinion, they're not prepared to really embrace the wealth of knowledge. Go and talk to recovered stutterers, and they exist. There's hundreds of them throughout the world. Go and talk to them. What did you do? What do you think helped you? Learn from them. And that's why I'm so happy to go down and talk to these university students, because they have fresh, inquiring minds, and it's a chance. Well, I was going to use the word brainwashing, but I better not. It's a chance to influence their understanding and their belief about stuttering, because I often think what they learn is probably 10 years out of date, maybe, and the profession needs to catch up. And they can catch up by talking to successful people who have become eloquent speakers. I've got graduates here in Australia who earn their living public speaking, and go and talk to them. Gee, you're a professional public speaker, and I knew you when you were a very overt stutterer. How did you get from A to B? But they don't. And to me, that shows a certain level of arrogance, but that's my opinion.
Well, and what's interesting, Geoff, about that, which I forget if we talked about this since we've been recording or if it was before we hit record, but people like Charles Van Riper and obviously Joseph Sheehan and Wendell Johnson. I mean, this is how the profession largely started. So you had these, you had quite a few of these luminaries who had made a ton of progress in their own stuttering journey 50, 90 years ago now. It was the 1930s at the University of Iowa, where, at least in the US, I don't know the history in all the other countries, but that's where the speech language pathology started as a discipline in the United States, and it was stutterers. It was Van Riper, those guys, and then Sheehan I think he got his PhD in psychology from the University of Iowa, so he was around those guys, and then he did his thing. So we really, and I've said this before on the podcast, but the profession regressed a lot at some point, because Van Riper and Sheehan and Johnson and some of those folks, I'm not saying they were right on everything, but man, they, if I had a 12-year-old, 14-year-old child who stutters, I would hand them off to Van Riper and Sheehan long before I'd hand them off to the speech therapist that I had in the 1980s and 90s. And there are some, it's starting to make a comeback now. Their knowledge, and I know Mcguire was heavily influenced by Joseph Sheehan as well. That knowledge has been around, and I think we're starting to get back to a lot of that. And also, I am a believer also in the modern, this idea that we really need to stop hating stuttering. I think it's counterproductive. Even blocks, I'm not saying it's ideal. I'm not saying it's fun to push our way through blocks, but we can still be fully human and block. We can still communicate. We can still get our hamburger, right? Even if we block, so long as we don't run away from ordering the hamburger. So to me, the avoidance is the central part of it, getting ourselves to a point of courage. And then if you can find a good technique, and like you, I like this, voice projection. I agree with the power of pausing and, formulating, and I think the stuttering wolf feeds off of panic.
Yeah.
And panic largely feeds off of rushing. So
Yeah.
if we can be cool, calm, and collected, like, nope, all right, the wolf is showing up. I'm not going to take the bait. I'm not going to feel like I got to spit this word out now. Get it out now. Oh my God. All that stuff, right? Cool, calm, and collected is essential.
Yeah. The first point on the Mcguire checklist is resist time pressure. I think, Michael, the mistake was made 30, maybe 40 years ago, where the speech pathology profession owned stammering and stuttering. So they took it over, and for a long time it was recognized as a speech problem. So much more to stuttering than stuttering. And I think they're starting to realize that now, because, to be frank, their treatments have been spectacularly unsuccessful. So they're starting to realize there's more to stuttering than the physical speech. That's probably only 10% of the story. We talk about the iceberg. You have a 90%. If you don't attend to that, if you don't melt the iceberg, long-term success won't be achieved.
I totally agree. And I love that analogy, right? If we were talking about a real iceberg in the ocean and you were trying to get rid of that iceberg, well, if you can melt the, say 90% of the iceberg below the surface, that's gone. What's above the surface is going to get a lot weaker, a lot more wobbly, a lot more susceptible to a good, hopefully a good technique. And as I said, I don't want to go off on this again, but the talking like this is not, in my opinion, a eloquent way to speak. And to try ordering a drink in a loud bar, excuse me, sir, can I have a Heineken, please? A what? A Heineken, please. People can't hear you, right? If you're talking to somebody that's older and they're hard of hearing, they can't hear you when you're talking like this, and just good public speaking 101 is project your voice and articulate. Because if
Yes.
people can't hear you, if they can't understand, then nothing is being communicated. Zero, you know? So hopefully we get back to some of those just, and I'm encouraging the speech language pathology department to do this also. Even if the technique did work outside of the clinic, who wants to sound like this all the time? People want to be, as John Harrison said, it's
Well,
about being yourself. It's
it's
about
not
being
true.
yourself, you know?
I became quite proficient at smooth speech. And to a degree, I was able to normalize it so it didn't sound too strange. But it's not me. It's not how I speak. And I wanted to use my natural, normal voice. Can't expect a 10, 12-year-old at school to be talking at 100, 120 syllables per minute. Gee, not only would he be bullied for his stuttering, he'd be bullied for that as well. So we
Well, and
need to
how do
be
you,
who we are. Mm.
right, and how do you feel internally too, for most people, if you're not being you, like that's just not compatible for most of us with happiness. And like you said, it's about quality of life. It's about, living the kind of life that you want to live. It's not all about stuttering or not stuttering. That shouldn't be the central thing, I don't think.
Mind you, Michael, having said that, I do know several people. That's the only way they can communicate, by using exaggerated smooth speech. And for them, I respect that. Everyone's different. The solution is different for everyone. And they've come to the conclusion they need to communicate in the real world. And if getting up in the morning and practicing that kind of speech and being able to use it in the real world, if that works for them, well, I respect that and congratulate them.
I totally agree with that. It's not a one size fits all sort of thing. And if that's, they're the expert on their life, not me. And so again, it's about quality of life. And so if that's, the life that they think is best for them, then more power to them for sure. And I think that's a general theme, you know, of this whole thing in general is to each his own or her own, and find your path and what you want to do and then go do it. Right.
Mind you, Michael, I've heard people at a conference or two speak to us with such bad stuttering that you couldn't follow what they were saying. Now, they were up there being brave, embracing their stuttering, but where it becomes a problem is communication completely breaks down. So you admire them for getting up there, having a go, but the audience attention is to how they're speaking, not what they're saying. So looking at effective communication, if that person wants to be an effective member of society, they just need to do something about it, Michael. And I can't believe that they're happy speaking that way when they cannot make themselves understood. It's about an effective communication. If you can't communicate effectively, there are things you can do to change that.
Yes, a point taken on that if it's so severe that somebody genuinely cannot communicate the vast majority of what they want to communicate because the blocks are so severe, and again, if that's what they want, if that's what they're happy with and they're okay with that, then it's their life, not mine. But from where I sit, I like to be able to communicate, whether I was, I'm pushing through blocks or not. I want to be able to get at least the most important thoughts I want to share, from my mind into others, and for them to be, and I want to understand what others have to say also. So, as a listener, and I've had that experience, I'm not going to say that I haven't, with some folks that are so severe. And I know they've got a world of interesting points to tell me, because I know they're intelligent and I know they're funny and they're all that, but the stutter is so severe that we just can't get to any of that, because and a lot of times people will just sort of give up on the point eventually, because it's just there's only so many hours in the day.
That's correct.
But
talking about hours, do you realize we've been talking for an hour and a half, and we could easily talk for another 2 hours on this? It's such interesting stuff. It really is. So I don't know, at some stage, if you want to schedule phase 2, and you can ask some questions that we haven't even covered yet. But I've enjoyed it, Michael. Yeah.
We can definitely have another chat for sure, Geoff, and I've thoroughly enjoyed it also. And I told you before we started that I'm sometimes notorious for going longer than I'm planning on, but it's the joy of communication, I guess, is my excuse. So, but it was a good conversation. Yes, sir.
Yeah, can I say, Michael, congratulations on what you're doing. You obviously have a passion to help people who stutter, and so keep up the good work.
Thank you, Geoff. I've very much enjoyed it, and we'll talk to you soon, my friend.
Okay. Bye for now.
Bye-bye.